A lot of us don't believe that giving up our addictions is loving for ourselves. But it is actually the most efficient way to deal with your soul's distress, actually. Because if you think about your addictions are there to avoid your soul's distress, right? So the more you engage your addictions, the less efficient you become, and the less loving of yourself you become. You know, the most loving thing to do for yourself is to give up your addictions and work through them so they're not there anymore. You'll also find your life becomes more efficient as well as a result, because most people don't realise how much interactions are wasted time based on addiction. Sort of like, it's one of the things I notice a lot now. Things that I would have done when I was 30, I don't do anymore, and it's made my life more efficient in terms of time. Things I would engage with people because of addiction, just reassuring them all the time, or calming them down all the time, and things like that. A lot of these things I would do, but it would actually make my life there'd be more demands of my time on my life as a result of doing it, and so therefore less pleasurable life as a result. And you don't really realise it when you're in it. It's only when you sort of look back on it you can go, wow, I just wasted so much time there. Yeah. I see it happening a lot in relationships, where people waste years of time in relationships basically by there being a cooperative addiction or a codependent addiction between each other, and they just waste years of their life doing things for each other that they wouldn't have to do if there wasn't an addiction involved. Yeah. So, as you progress, you realise how much God wants you to deal with your addictions, and how important that is to get rid of them. And in fact, there's not a single way you can enter the celestial spheres without having dealt with all of them. Yeah. That's what I like about dealing with our celestial friends. There's no addictions in the interaction. If you want to talk and they want to talk, we talk right now. You know what I mean? If they don't want to talk and you want to talk, well, it's too bad. It's not happening. There's no oh, I'm sorry or anything like that. There's no need for that. It's sort of, yeah. You already know that everyone in the celestial heavens, you already know that everyone around you is motivated by love. So if they can't speak with you, there's a loving reason why. On Earth, oftentimes when someone doesn't want to speak to you, you presume the worst, right? You go. Or if somebody does want to speak to you, you go, what do they want to speak to me for? There must be something wrong. What have I done wrong? What have they, what's going on? But it's sort of like, if a celestial spirit wants to speak to you, you always know there's a good reason. So, and even if you've done something wrong, they're happy to tell you. Is there any questions you have about this morning? Any more questions? Sandra, you?
I've been reflecting a lot lately about thoroughness.
Yep.
Because that's kind of part of this whole taking responsibility, not wasting time, efficiency.
Yep.
And I wonder whether it's something that grows as you grow in love, or is it something that you decide and you learn as part of that physical part that you spoke about earlier, where you look after yourself physically, so thoroughness is part of that, or whether it's something that grows as you grow in love.
I suppose you could say that as you grow in love, your desire to do things the very best way you can grows. Because you want the very best outcome for every action you take. But you measure the best based on not just what happens physically, but it's what happens emotionally and spiritually as well as physically. The best is defined by what God thinks is best. And so when you're motivated by love, your desire is that everything works out for the best. And that means that everything that you do, you look at it from the point of view of, I want to do it the best possible way I can do it, the most efficient way I can do it. And so you don't need somebody else sort of regulating your behaviour anymore. You become self-regulatory in that regard. And also you don't need anybody telling you what's loving or what's not loving, because your desire is to only do the loving thing. So you want to know what's loving, and you might ask other people to tell you what they believe is loving, but you want to know it for yourself. You want to feel it for yourself, not just think it, but feel it, that this is the best thing. And so as you grow in love, you feel strongly about what is the best course of action on anything. So example of that, there are many examples of that I can bring up, but in terms of my own life, it's sort of like I'm always thinking, what's the most loving thing we can do to Mary and I to move forward in our relationship? What's the most loving course of action we can take together? Like, what's the most loving thing we can choose to do when I'm sharing truth with you? I don't need you to tell me. I'm trying. One of the things I want to do is feel where you're at, not where you think you're at, but where you're actually at. And I want to share things with you that might help you in that place. And I want to do it to the best of my ability. I don't need you to tell me whether I'm good or not about it. I want to do it to the best of my ability, where I feel like I've said what I feel could only be said, And the only times I feel a bit disappointed with myself is when I feel like I come away from a thing going, I didn't say enough, or I didn't say that how I would really like to have said that, or do you know what I mean? But as you grow in love, you feel that more and more as well, like what is the right way to say things and do things, because you're in more harmony with God's way of saying or doing, and so you want to you naturally become more in harmony with that. But it's not like you're having to try to regulate yourself, like you're just automatically more self-regulating. You're not trying to be more loving. So a lot of times when we meet people, we notice this particularly in some countries, where everybody's sort of almost like sickly, like trying sickly. When we say sickly, Mary and I have this thing where
I call it saccharine, like overly sweet, when it feels false, sort of like artificial
false
sweetness.
Artificial
like,
sweetness.
How you can sort of tell it tastes sweet initially, we can sort of tell that's not.
It's all
sugar.
just a bit bitter aftertaste sort of
It sort of feels funny.
There's not a lot of realness in it, right? And this is what happens when you get all intellectually bound up with God's truth without feeling it. You have a tendency to want to, you're using your mind and you're trying hard and you're trying to change and trying to improve, but and to some level of degree there is some sincerity there in the desire to try, but we also at the same time often want to avoid our feelings, and so we're trying to circumnavigate around the real way of doing it. So you could say God's way is God's determined a very narrow way in which you can progress to God. That narrow path is very clear, and it requires certain things of you that you are going to have to do no matter who you are, right? And they are all the same things that it requires of somebody else. And it's a very narrow way. It's going to require you getting rid of all these distractions and addictions and everything, and really focus on that way that God has defined as the way to have a relationship with God. And the reason why it's narrow in a way, when I say narrow, it's sort of like a fixed path, is because God's definition of love is fixed. It's not. There's no negotiating with God's definition of love. God says, this is loving, this isn't. This is loving, this isn't. And so you're going to have to come to accept certain things are loving and certain things just are not. And on that way, that path that you're following to God and to God's love and having a relationship with God, and you will find more and more the most efficient thing to do is to do it God's way. Any other way you try is just going to take you longer, because any other way is a diversion. So I often think of it like a trip. If God's the destination of the trip, let's say we were on a trip to let's say Mary and I are going to Brisbane. So what we decide to do is go to Perth first. Right, that's not very efficient, because Perth, for those of you who don't know Australia's topology, is the opposite direction as Brisbane, from where we are, completely the opposite direction. And let's say from Perth we decided to go to South Africa, and then we decided to go to South America, and then we decided to go, we'll go back to Europe, and then we decide, no, we'll go to Russia, and then we go down to China, and then we'll go across to India, and then we go down to the Philippines, then we'll go back up to England, and then we'll go across to Canada, and if Japan missed out, so we've got to go there. And eventually we get to Brisbane. Well, you can see that if my goal was go to Brisbane, then that was a very inefficient way, wasn't it? Right, when Brisbane is only 200 k's from where I am right now. So really, a lot of us are trying to take a road to God that is completely the opposite way that God defines the direction to be. And this is what I notice about most religious faiths, New Age religion on earth, and that many of them are distractions from the path to God. And eventually you might end up at God by following these religious paths. When I say you might, you eventually will have to, you might, through your meandering through all of the other paths, come around to the point that there is one way and follow that eventually. But the sooner you can do that, the better, right? It's like if I'm planning a trip to Brisbane, the sooner I get to Brisbane, the better my desires are going to be satisfied through that trip. But if I go everywhere else other than Brisbane, then, and a lot of the places might be completely opposite to my desire to be there, you can see I'm going to become unhappy, disappointed, distracted. I might even give up, right, if I follow a different way. The problem is for many hearing or listening to Divine Truth on video at the moment is they think they understand the way, because they try to interpret the way through their own filters of what they believe the way should be, and then they think they're understanding the way. The critical thing as a teacher of God's way is to disabuse people of that idea and to help people understand, no, that is not the way. And so when I'm saying to you guys, look, that is not the way, I'm not saying that to tell you off. I'm trying to save you time, and I'm trying to save you heartache, and I'm trying to save you pain and suffering by saying, no, what you think is the way, or what you think you want to be the way, that's not the way. We need to disabuse people of the untruth of what is involved and focus them on the truth. Now, that's my focus with you, right? And it's my focus with everyone I meet, really, is to go, no, what you're thinking is the way. If it is the way, I'll tell you. Right? I've been on the way long enough myself to know what is the way. And I've been on the way long enough to know when you're faking it and when you're trying to intellectually do it and you're not doing it. I know I've had, in the 2,000 years I've been alive, you think about it, even if I've only met 1,000 people a year, over 2,000 years, that's 2 million people that I've been able to study and work out things. And that, by the way, is not how many people I've met per year. Like, in the course of a year in our life, even on earth in the first century, in the course of a year, Mary and I would meet 100,000 people easily, in our travels, even in the first century where there wasn't planes and boats and trains, But in the spirit world, meeting 1 million people a year is like very common to meet 1 million people a year, easily. You think with all of that experience we've had meeting people and seeing their life and seeing their the patterns of their life, you can see it's pretty easy for us to see when something's not right, and when something is. And also, not only that, even if we come to a brand new situation, God's feelings are very apparent to us about what's right. So that makes it easy to tell a person, no, you're on the road, not to Brisbane, but you're on the road somewhere else, And you can go down that road if you want because you have free will. You're allowed to go down that road if you want. Many of you, when we see you going down roads, like, we don't say much to you about it, really, do we? Only when you ask. We go, well, yeah, you're going down the wrong road there. Many of you don't believe us at the time, only to find out 5 years later that that was the wrong road. I shouldn't have taken that turn. If you had a bit more trust, you might circumnavigate some of your problems more. But the reality is that it has to be from your heart to do it. It can't be your head being used to do it. Your soul has to be involved. Your soul development is the important thing here. And you can't develop your soul with your head. You can assist its development by making good decisions, but you can't develop your soul with your head. You have to go through emotions to develop your soul. You have to go through feelings. You have to absorb spiritual concepts with your soul, not with your mind, in order to progress. And that's a very important part of this process. So a morning like this morning is indicative of the soul is not developing with the concepts. There's an attempt to try to do the concepts, but the soul isn't developing to apply the concepts. So the only way you can apply the concepts in reality is going to be your soul must develop. Now, it can't develop if you refuse to feel emotion. It can't develop if you refuse to deal with your addictions. It can't develop if you refuse to ask God for love, right? When I say it can't develop asking God for love, it can develop if you refuse to ask God for love and you still deal with your emotions. But if you decide to involve God, things are going to develop a lot more rapidly if you do that. So it's better to do that. It can only develop through a real process going on in your soul. It needs to be transformed. That's why in the Padre message we always talked about the transformation of the soul. That has to happen. And that can only happen through engaging a sincere process. And a sincere process is going to involve you learning how to love yourself in all 4 aspects of what we talked about today. Right? You can't neglect 1 or 2 or 3 of those aspects and then go, I want a relationship with God. God's not interested in you being an incomplete soul. He wants you to be a complete individual. He wants you to be a happy, self-sufficient individual. That's his goal for you. He wants you to engage yourself fully. He doesn't want you to be half a baked soul. That's not his goal for you. And the only way that's going to happen is for you to apply these principles in all of those areas of your life, not neglecting areas of your life. So, like I said earlier, not neglecting the physical, caring for yourself physically, not neglecting the emotional, caring for yourself emotionally, not neglecting the sexual, caring for yourself sexually, not neglecting the spiritual, caring for yourself spiritually. God wants you to not neglect any of those areas. He wants you to focus on dealing with those areas so that you can progress and become a complete person. Now, if you do that and your soulmate do that, it is definite that you will meet, probably on earth, and you will also be able to continue your progress after you meet. But if you don't do that, you will have holes, areas where you are like a child, areas where you're immature, areas where you're like a baby that has undeveloped areas of yourself. And as a result of that, when you meet the other half of yourself and they're like a baby in some areas and you're like a baby in some areas, it's going to be like a baby fight, a child fight, a 2-year-old fight. What do they look like? No, very unpredictable, very unpredictable outcomes, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unhappiness and tantrums. And that's what it's going to look like if you don't do things God's way. If you do things God's way, it'll be very different to that. So that's what I'd like to encourage you guys to do. It's like, don't neglect the aspect of loving yourself and seeing the benefits of loving yourself, and let everybody else off the hook for loving you. When you love yourself, you no longer need everybody else to love you. You no longer demand anybody else to love you. And now when somebody else does love you, you'll recognise it as a gift. And so you'll be able to have decent relationships with people as a result. That are real, based upon soul-to-soul interactions, where they get the real you and you get the real them. And it doesn't, to be honest with you, it doesn't matter how bad you think you are. The more real you are about it, the better everything is. It doesn't matter how bad you think other people are either. The more real you are about it, the better everything's going to be. You've got to learn to be really honest with yourself and with everyone else around you. Truthful with each other.